folks. Sorry for the hiatus in recording. Um, yeah, I had a really wicked cough. That just it was not amenable to just being recorded at all. It was awful. And hopefully uh that's okay with you all. I'm going to start just recording these the couple of lectures we've got left because we did cover the really big core essential pieces like right before we left, all the quant aspects, because really the only key kind of essential core pieces left are some basic actual individual differences content. And so I've broken this series into measures of intelligence, which we'll start with here, and then continue and essentially wrap up with some classic personality tests. Unfortunately, I'm unable to like show you these tests in person, um, because well, I'm in the middle of my apartment recording. But yeah. So anyway, today I'm gonna cover the first half of the first slides on intelligence. So there's going to be two. So this is the first quarter, I guess. And we're going to cover the Binet scales after talking a little about intelligence. Cool. So defining it. Let me make sure I have my show notes. Okay. So like any concept in psychology, one of the big challenges is defining it. And this in the there are many, because it's a challenge to define any construct. There are numerous working definitions. My personal favorite is intelligence is what is being measured on an intelligence test, which is very circular, I know, but at least it's clear what your score is. It's your performance on the test. It's not, some broader generalization, because for those of you that have the book, Anastasi really tries to hammer this home about how intelligence tests and the scores from them should be regarded as descriptive and should be used instead to just help understand an individual rather than label them. So these principles don't just apply to intelligence tests, but Anastasi's expertise is part of it is just measurement of intelligence. She and I disagree on the interpreting of heritability, but if you're interested in that, I recommend you take my personality class, because we talk more about it there. I've got a whole unit on behavior genetics. But the core kind of piece is that however you operationalize intelligence, you shouldn't consider them in isolation. That's also why we're going to be covering multiple tests, versions of intelligence, as well as cover personality. So yeah, but let me keep going ahead. Yeah, so there's a couple of different definitions. Binet, and so I've just reproduced them here. The tendency to take and maintain a definite direction, the capacity to make adaptations for the purpose of attaining a desired end, and the power of autocriticism. You've got Spearman, which is the ability to deduce either relations or correlates. And Gardner, the ability to resolve genuine problems or difficulties as they're encountered. The idea here is your ability to figure things out, to use the materials you have at hand to do that. There are tons of them, and they tend to be, so every definition you have tends to be linked up with a general theory followed by that researcher. And so the three kind of independent traditions for the study of intelligence are psychometric, so test structure, which is most likely why my favorite definition is it's whatever is being measured on your test. You also have an information and processing kind of framework, which focuses on learning and problem solving. And third, you have a cognitive approach, which is the adaptation to real world demands. And so combined, these kind of give us all those key pieces of intelligence. Now, as a class activity, I would have had you all kind of crowdsource a definition, and we'd see how close it was to any of the classic ones. But I'm not going to make you do that because coronavirus. But just think about what your, classic definition is, and see if it covers all three pieces. Excuse me. Oop. Sorry, I have a special guest underneath. We'll see if he comes about. We got a different special guest. Boop. Okay. Yeah. Now, we already covered a little bit about the history of testing back in the day, back in January, and how intelligence testing was kind of instigated in France at the end of the 19th century because of this controversial decision to try and identify intellectually limited kids in order to identify them and remove them from regular classes. The idea was so that those identified students could receive specialized training to help bring them up to the intellect of their same age counterparts. So to bring them back up to baseline. Hello, Tukes. I think he's gonna be, yeah. Well, yeah. So in 1904, the minister of France appoints a committee to essentially recommend a procedure for identifying these intellectually limited kids. Okay. We have two special guests. Okay. They're just getting in mischief. It's what they do. We covered this, hinted at lots of aspects of this by looking at like norm-based references, but two early principles were age differentiation. So you wanted a means to identify. Hello, Tukes. Oh, I got a cat sitting on a keyboard. Sorry, it's chaos. To differentiate older kids from younger kids just based on their mental capacities. The idea is that older children have greater skills than younger children, and we can kind of quantify this as like mental age. So the knowledge and task ability of a specific age group. Now these abilities can be assessed and each respondent compared to like their both relative performance and absolute performance. And we use IRT often today to calculate these ability levels, this mental age. And the other basic idea, so first you've got this age-based piece. The other piece is this general mental ability. Intelligence can be composed of several individual factors, but Binet and most folks have been more interested, are more interested in the overall kind of general ability. So several different factors like verbal ability, spatial reasoning, quantitative ability, those all get absorbed into this idea of general intelligence. There's this overall kind of generic ability to work things out and perform well on tests. So general mental ability, first proposed by Galton in Hereditary Genius. It was also independently proposed by Charles Spearman. And he argued that intelligence consisted of one general factor, G, plus a large number of kind of specific factors, such as verbal, quantitative, etc. The idea here is that there's a hierarchical structure. And Spearman's G, G acts like a single general factor. It's G is for general ability. Higher scores, the higher your sum scores on G. Ooh, I misspelled that, sorry. The higher they are on specific intelligences. So like the smarter you are in those individual aspects, the more able you are in general. So higher G associated with higher subscores. But you can have like lopsided subscores, so you could be really talented at quantitative and just abysmal at verbal. And depending on how those are combined, you could either still have a really above average, depending on how well above average your quantitative is compared to your below average. But it's the idea with G is it captures a general factor. Typically, a G can explain about half of the variance on any given test. So like on it, and this is a cross like diverse test. So about half of the variability, half of test performance can be explained by that general factor. The rest of it is a mixture of things that can either be like content specific, so like studying for the test, personality based. There's a mix, but about half. And Spearman noticed that for most seemingly unrelated like abilities, so like anything intelligence based at all, they seem to be positively correlated. This is called the positive manifold. And so on average, people who were higher in verbal were also higher in quantitative. So if you scored well on one type of test, you tended to score well on another type of test. In general, like doing well in one predicts doing well in another because you have this general skill set. If you don't see that strong association, that suggests that your tests aren't capturing the same thing. And so to see a consistent correlation, it's fairly compelling that you're tapping into the same construct. And so here I have a path diagram visualizing the relationship between G, general ability, and the specific ability. So here, the big circle at the top is G, and each of the components are the distinct, separate kind of abilities. Verbal, math, visuospatial, vocab. So they all relate to G. G influences all of these specific abilities. That's the idea. And there's only one latent trait, so there's only one circle here, and just test performance on all these different ability types is influenced by G. That's why the arrows go from G to S. Now there are other theories. Howard Gardner, who I have strong opinions, very strong opinions, about. Last time I checked, he was in the School of Education at Harvard, but I could be wrong. But he had this idea that there are 8 different kinds of intelligences, that these are multiple intelligences, and they are independent. The idea is that you can be, so there's no G. G would suggest that all these types of intelligence are associated with some general ability. Gardner argues there's not. And so you've got linguistic, which is the ability to use, like with clarity, core operations of language. An example of someone who's skilled at this is politicians. Logic, mathematical, and scientific. Surprise, surprise, scientists tend to have this. Interpersonal ability forms accurate model of oneself. Yeah. And use that model to operate effectively in life. So therapists, novelists. Now, I disagree with this theory. I don't find a lot of empirical evidence, but it's brought up a lot by lay people. You'll see it in like media and whatnot. So I at least want you to be aware that it exists. Some more. So we've got interpersonal, which is the ability to notice and make distinctions among other individuals' moods, temperaments, motivations. People who tend to have this are politicians, or successful people who are high on this ability are like politicians, religious leaders, therapists. You've got musical, which is the ability to use the core set of musical elements, so like pitch, rhythm, timbre. It's definitely not timbre. As someone who does not have musical ability, played lots of years of flute, didn't really matter. Musicians, singers, composers, they tend to fall in this bucket. Got spatial I think we're at 6. The capacity to perceive the world accurately and recreate one's visual experiences. So sailors, engineers, sculptors, painters, be able to work in 3 dimensions to visualize the space. Last 2. Okay, so we've got bodily or kinesthetic, which is the ability to control one's bodily motions and the ability to handle objects skillfully. So actors, dancers, acrobats, athletes, those non-klutzy folks. Also, I'd argue that you could put surgeons in here for the amount of like fine motor precision they need, as you do not want someone that is low on this cutting you open. Or okay, I'm gonna keep going. So last we got naturalistic. So it's this ability to comprehend and classify and understand things encountered in the world of nature. Farmers, ranchers, animal handlers, zookeepers. Yeah, there's really not a great literature out there other than Howard's book supporting this as empirical. So like when you like analyze data that essentially tests all 8 of these types of intelligence, we find that they're positively correlated, which means that they're not independent. So it's not like you have 8 independent skills. And if that were the case, so if Howard's theory was correct, you're on average, people who are high on bodily kinesthetic that is unrelated to their performance on like being naturalistic. So on average, there would be a correlation of 0 between all 8 of these measures. Well, in reality, we don't we see a correlation pretty high. So other theories, and we'll kind of there's tons of different theories. I don't disagree with this one that makes a kind of a distinction between fluid and crystallized. And fluid intelligence taps into those abilities that allow us to reason, think, and acquire new knowledge. They help us learn new things, while crystallized is like the knowledge and understanding of information that we've already acquired. So like combined wisdom. So I cutesily kind of refer to these as being like clever versus wise. Fluid is kind of clever, your ability to like work with new stuff and move pieces around, versus crystallized, which is more wizened and wise. So it's the information you have. It looks like I might lose power soon. So I'm going to cut it off here and render these slides and hope nothing goes awry. Yeah, tons of different theories, but we're going to focus on G. But acknowledge. So we'll start talking about Stanford in a bit. Stanford Binet. I'm going to stop the recording here. Hope power doesn't go out, and upload these really soon.